Welcome everyone. I am Wendy Eady, Managing Director for eCom. We're a leading provider of digital learning solutions with over, we're just saying 25 years of experience in the field. But today's webinar is about understanding the impact of technology on the learning landscape. And as I said, we're recording this session for anyone who is unable to attend today. So when we're talking about the impact of technology on learning, who better to join us on this subject but Donald Clark? He's an internationally recognised EdTech entrepreneur, speaker and blogger. He has been involved in the field of learning technologies, must be more than 30 years now, I would have thought, and then during which time he has designed and implemented numerous award-winning e-learning projects. Donald is a regular keynote speaker at conferences and events worldwide, and his talks are known for their engaging style and thought-provoking content. So prepare yourself, as there's going to be a whirlwind of a webinar with insights coming at you from every angle. But first, I'd just like to cover a little bit of housekeeping. During the presentation today, we've got the cameras and microphones off, but we do, however, welcome your questions, which you can send to us at any time by clicking the Q&A button. I think it's at the top of your Teams window. Just type in the questions in that box that will appear. We will collect these and then address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So, one of Donald's many books covers the history, this one covers the history of learning technology, spanning a mere 50,000 years back to cave drawings and then the Big Bang of writing. And it now feels like we're in another kind of explosion of activity with AI and there's loads of tools, but in particular ChatGPT. And what is to me most surprising is that everyone that I know that's used AI, whether they know it or not, has completely different use cases, but all love it. So I was going to hand over to Donald, but my question is the versatility of AI technology what is winning people over? Hand over to you, Donald.
Okay, thanks very much, Wendy. Well, all of you here will recognise that I am also Scottish and have a strong Scottish accent, although I am actually speaking to you from Brighton, which is as far away from Wendy in the UK as you can get, right on the south coast. And as Wendy rightly said, during COVID, I actually wrote 3 books, one of which was Learning Technology, this sort of sweep across the history of learning technology. And, it's never easy to sort of predict the future, but if you're in the technology game, you sort of have to be. You really have to be, or else your business won't succeed. And so I think there are certain long-term things about L&D that we can base upon learning theory, for example, if that's always going to win out here. And when you mentioned the big bangs of writing, then printing, then broadcast media that took media into your own home, then we had the personal computer, the internet being another huge big bang. And I'm going to really focus on the AI thing, because I think like other big bangs, it's been met with a sort of the usual wave of negativity and suspicion. I think that's absolutely normal. I mentioned that in the first chapter of my book about 10 different things to do with technology. One is a wave of negativity, largely, I think, based on confirmation bias, negativity bias. Steven Pinker's written extensively about that. That wall we hit whenever something new comes into our lives. And boy, has AI come into our lives big time. But the truth of the matter is, I think this may be, and this is perspective idea, this may be the biggest bang of all. Writing, which was invented about 5,000 years ago, certainly was the last major event, I think, that really exploded and changed culture, generated cultural capital, allowed us as a species to gather knowledge, improve, and fed progress, which is why we all live longer, happier lives, we're all wealthier, and so on and so forth. Now, AI, why would I say that AI is the biggest bang of all? Well, I think it changes our relationship with knowledge, really, fundamental change of our relationship with the stuff that's out there as cultural capital. And I say that because initially with the invention of writing, you have the externalization of knowledge. But then when other media, especially printing, comes along, you have the distribution of knowledge, of course, and in learning through textbooks, through Bibles in your own vernacular language and so on. But eventually that was still knowledge as a thing which we had to find and engage with. And indeed, of course, knowledge was kept from us by keeping it in Latin, for example, so the church and the state would keep control. But beyond that, when computers and the internet comes along, it's not really knowledge as content that mattered. What really mattered for me was search. It was really the accessibility to knowledge that was important. And of course, what we had with Google, essentially, because that became the main way of accessing this stuff, was access to not only text, which is what writing and printing was about, but also, of course, text in Wikipedia, but all newspaper articles, books online, which we could buy online, but also audio through podcasts and music, also video through YouTube. And of course, 3D worlds through Google Earth, Google Maps, and of course, ultimately VR, AR, and the other coming media. So our change with the relationship with knowledge was not one of it's out there, find it. It was accessible to anyone with an internet access on the planet. But that was because of search. Search continues to be developed, of course, through semantic search. And what's happening with, and of course, that is AI. So backing up my initial proposition that AI will be the biggest bang of all, it really was search that mattered in terms of content or knowledge. Suddenly, in November 22, that relationship with knowledge changed dramatically with the launch of ChatGPT. And of course, I'd been working for several years with these types of models, so it wasn't such a big surprise to myself. But the very fact that it landed in your lap, you could go on a free app, and it would blow your mind what you could do with the thing, meant that your relationship with knowledge had changed. And let me explain what I meant by change. First of all, the interface is fiendishly simple, like Google. The best interfaces always are. I think a lot of UX designers might be out of work soon, to be honest. The idea that you have to have lots of fancy stuff and menu structures and so on may be cast to one side as we have this fiendishly simple interface that actually maps what we do with other human beings. It's a really going back to a Socratic method of learning, which is important here. Not only the interface, remember that these large language models capture the sum of human thought or the sum of human stored language on the internet and use that as data. So ChatGPT is really us. It just reflects us. It's not something separate. It is us. It's the total cultural capital of our own species. But when I say things have changed, what I mean by that is that we've moved from simply accessing and pulling out knowledge to something very different where we create knowledge. We co-create in ChatGPT with the technology itself. We organize, we synthesize, we evaluate knowledge. This is why the learning with technology world is changed irrevocably on that day. And we will not be going back because there are four things. It used to be quite a simple world. There were teachers, trainers, instructors, tutors on one side and learners on the other, a dyad, as it were, and one taught the other. And of course, there was a dialectic between them. But that dyad has changed quite dramatically now. We're now in a world of human teachers, human learners, but also technology that teaches and technology that also learns. Now, that is an important phrase. AI is a technology that learns. So ChatGPT not only was trained on this huge corpus of human knowledge, and not many people know this, but ChatGPT was also trained using real humans. So there were all sorts of odd cases in ChatGPT and the oddball things that happened, and the Twitter was full of this stuff. But actually they used human beings to fine tune the system, not change the big set of parameters behind the scenes, but fine tune the system so that it didn't behave rather oddly and randomly. And it will only get better. This thing is learning very, very fast. And the rumor, of course, is that ChatGPT-4 will be out literally this coming week or next week. Who knows if that's true? But if it does, hang on to your hats, because that will literally blow your mind. So coming back to this idea that we have what I call pedagogy, P-E-D-A-I-gogy, with the AI in the middle, I think all pedagogy will be shifted fundamentally by this technology, because we have technology that learns and technology that teaches. Now, there is one other incredibly important feature of this technology that we may be forgetting, and that is that this is not just about text. In many ways, we're drowning in a sea of text. You know, if you go through the educational system currently, then you will be sitting in classrooms right through to university master's degree. You have 20 solid years of reading and regurgitating and writing text. And yet when you go into the workplace, that's not really what happens. It's a real 3D place with real people, and other skills are terribly more important. Nobody really goes into work where they just write essays, for example. And the new forms of AI that will be hot on the heels, they're already there, are what are called multimodal. Now, multimodal means you'll be producing or co-creating not only text, but images, audio, and video. So GPT-4 promises to be multimodal. So this stuff that's in us isn't just text, of course. Culturally, we've produced lots of text, but we've also produced lots of images, lots of art, unbelievable amounts of video on platforms like YouTube, which has really become a sort of learning platform in a way, you know, sort of all those how-to videos and so on. So rather than being under the yoke of text-heavy institutions, which I think we've been for too long, we'll be moving, I think, into a much more multimodal, multimedia method of learning. And anyone who's been involved in online learning knows that that has to happen. Most online learning is still incredibly sort of dull and text-based, you know, text graphic, multiple choice questions, speech bubbles, cartoons. I think finally we'll be able to break free from that model, because it will be much cheaper, much quicker, with much higher quality to use these tools to create content, for example. The fact is, when people go into work, most people want a sort of working knowledge of things they want to do, not an over-engineered PowerPoint or an abstract course. So this new era of pedagogy, AI-gogy, may herald a more dynamic way of formal teaching and learning. I think it will swing quickly towards almost performance support in the workplace, because the AI will be able to provide exactly what you need when you need it in the flow of work, as opposed to a formal abstract course. It will be demand-driven and not supply-driven. And I think there are already really clear examples of this coming through. So if we look at across the learning journey, for example, everything from search through learner engagement to learning analysis, through to learner support, learning delivery, personalization, even through to assessment, AI is touching everything. Now, AI, so let's go through that learning journey and start with interfaces and engagement. Google is AI. AI is the new UI. Everything you do online is mediated by AI, all your social media. If you watch Prime or Netflix, all mediated by AI, all of those interfaces. Alexa, voice through Siri on your smartphone. And of course, ChatGPT just brings that into the foreground. You'll be able to ask ChatGPT 4.0 by speaking to it, not just typing in. And on learner engagement, I saw a great example in Glasgow where I was speaking, where I saw Wendy last in real life. And it was from a college in my hometown, a guy called Ali Robertson, who gave me the best ever, I think, example of student or learner engagement through ChatGPT. He had been dealing with kids, some of whom had already been imprisoned. They were only 16 for serious crimes. They had their hoodies up, and he was trying to engage them in the learning process, opened up ChatGPT and asked them what they would like. And one lad sort of jokingly said, "Could you help me with my Tinder account? My Tinder profile's terrible." So Ali did that, and the kid went from 0 hits to 90 in a day. Now, nobody's going to, after hearing that example, nobody's going to tell me that ChatGPT is not engaging or won't engage learners. I mean, it hit 1 million after 5 days. After 2 months, there were 200 million people actively using ChatGPT, the fastest adoption of any software app in the history of technology. So I think in terms of learner engagement is going to happen, certainly in learner analytics. The whole thing is a data-driven system. It's taking data, it's learning from data, it's improving because of data. It knows who you are, or can know who you are, and improve your process through the learning process. I think on learner support also, you will see these chatbots coming in learner support. I mean, we've had many of these examples in the past, the famous one being at Georgia Tech. And remember, this was 4 years ago now, I think, before COVID, when they took one learning assistant. They had 9 in total, took one out and swapped it with a chatbot, which they built themselves. This is Georgia Tech. These kids were smart, but they didn't spot that it was a piece of software. In fact, they put it up for a teaching award. Now, that is a very interesting happening. They actually had to slow the chatbot down because it was too fast to make it look as though it was a human being actually typing the response. But that was the first example we really saw in the public domain where it really was performing a sort of teaching support function. And I think many, many people are currently using ChatGPT in the classroom. Let your learners use it. Even when you're doing that old classroom PowerPoint lecturing thing, I've seen some great examples on tricky topics like cybersecurity, where if you come across a term you don't know, you simply ask ChatGPT during the lecture and so on to make sure you don't get left behind by abstruse vocabulary. And there's a great paper coming out from MIT showing that actually when learners and people in the workplace use ChatGPT, it isn't actually just replacing what they did and turning them into mindless text generators. It's actually allowing people to think more. It takes the spade work away and allows you to be more creative in your writing. Very interesting paper that will be, it's unpublished at the moment, the paper, but it will be out next month. And then when it comes to learning delivery, of course, who can deny that the world for learn? I mean, I wrote a whole book on learning experience design. And in that book, the final chapter is all about AI predicting that this would happen. But the world of learning design has changed forever. It should be cheaper, faster, higher quality, because you can just generate stuff using these tools. I think tools like Articulate and those sort of things are really things of a bygone age, really. The text graphic, video, multiple choice question. We'll have open input questions where AI can interpret the answer, which is what ChatGPT actually does. It's about time we had that approach to life rather than the rather turgid multiple choice questions. Of course, you have to learn how to prompt, but I think fundamentally, both learning designers and learning technology people really have to upskill on the AI front almost immediately now. You have to use this tool, you have to understand how it works, and more importantly, you will have to understand what impact it will have in your world, because that impact is already happening. The business is using this. They will expect you to use it, creating audio, graphics, video, text, using such tools in a co-creative fashion, changing the whole relationship with knowledge in your organization. And of course, you'll be able to interrogate stuff within your organization, that huge mother load of stuff, PowerPoints, documents, and so on. So, and go try Duolingo AI system. You've got 100 million people doing that for free online. You're using Google, you're using AI daily. So my appeal there in this sort of short introduction to the subject. So I've written a whole book about AI and learning, of course. This other one, don't want to bore you with too many books, but this was a long time coming for me, but I think it was entirely predictable. Now that it's here, I think it's up to us to embrace it, not to reject it or see it as some sort of, turn it into a sort of hunt for students that cheat or something, turning learning into a totally toxic environment. I think we should be positive about it because it has nothing but social benefits and goods in terms of making learning cheaper, faster, and better. So I'm sure you have lots of questions there, but I'd like to segue back to Wendy now, because Wendy's going to give us a sort of 8 trends in L&D and come down to a very practical, more fine-grained level. But I think what I've said supports almost everything Wendy's going to say here about learning becoming data-driven, for example. But I'll leave that for her to explain in more detail. Thank you very much. Over to you, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. So the questions are coming through. So if you've got, feel free to head into the Q&A section and add them in, and we're going to cover these at the very end. So as you can see, well, as you can hear, we're in a pretty transformational phase for learning and educational technology. So what does that mean when it comes to effective practices for using LearnTech? So through our experiences, we've identified eight trends for learning and development. They're not all blue sky thinking either. These are effective practices that you should be applying now. We'll look at a lot of them, but we're not going to go into every single detail. But however, I do want to touch on some that are changing the way we work and learn. So not all of our clients' learners are office-based. Some of them were what we all called key workers during that COVID phase, you know, food or packaging production or networking, for example. But the working landscape probably has changed the most for that traditional office-based worker or learner, where the office was the beating heart of their organisation, where the company culture was felt and there was a sense of purpose and belonging was developed. And unfortunately, that's all gone, and most likely forever. Even as we move into this sort of hybrid working, I noticed the retail shop next full of racks of suits for people. It's the first time I've really noticed that. So they must know that times are changing from loungewear and slippers to a bit of a more formal attire, even if it is for only 2 days a week that people are being asked to return back to the office. So to really crack that nut of hybrid working, organisations really need to create an employee experience in that digital world that builds sort of an emotional connection to the organisation and ultimately that individual's career there. And that's where we're seeing learning applications like ours. They're increasing digital skills of the workforce, but at the same time as supporting the employee well-being and the recruitment process and the retention, crucially the retention. We want to create, or they are creating, that sort of halo effect for the organisation as being seen as an employer of choice, creating a sense of belonging, recognition, creation of connections at work, including career development pathways that can really emotionally lock people into a process and within a career. And it's this change more than most that's enabling the trends that we're seeing, and from, like we were talking about, the use of data to identify the most effective methods, diagnose training needs, ensure training and learning is focused on that performance, or evaluate effectiveness, or how to adapt and improve solutions. We were just talking earlier about reflecting. You have to reflect on a little bit, but we've got to get a lot of the action as well and going forward. But this is how one of our clients, British Council, is using the data on their learners across the globe. They are delivering quite a lot of different projects, but one of them, they're effectively delivering MOOCs with an enviable success rate for completion, which is quite remarkable when you benchmark it across others. And it's the data that's telling us that, and it's telling us what's working, what's the performance, what's effective with them, and they're working on that really well and having really great success. My footnote on data, though, is that while infinite data may sound tempting, it is important not to lose sight of why you're collecting that data in the first place. As ChatGPT will show you, there's a lot of data out there, and we've got to make sure that we're using it right and ethically. So, and like Donald was saying, reporting on those. So having that, it's all very well having all that data, but if you've not got excellent reporting capabilities, then you're not going to be able to truly analyse that data that you're going forward. I think this might be quite a small infographic, but this is going through the 8 trends. So we've covered one of them, which is data. The second one in there is self-directed learning, which in my mind actually means being responsible for their own development, people's own development in their chosen career, rather than that sort of Netflix for learning, free-for-all concept that's been battered around for a while. Learners say that less is more. And it's like walking into one of those old-fashioned sweet shops, so every sweet you can imagine. Sounds amazing, looks amazing, impactful visually, but when it comes to picking something out, most people, including myself, just feel overwhelmed and stick to what I know I like. Psychologically, if you've got less options, you're more likely to try something new. And that's one of the approaches that's been highly successful for our client, MainCap, in delivering appropriate training across its workforce. And they've also done a brilliant job in transferring in their fantastic organisation culture through to their digital core. And they use obviously an eCom solution, but they've branded it MenCap Learning Lounge, and it's got its own vibe going on, and it's fantastic. It's really it's a really great example. And we're just talking about the less is more with MenCap. If there was ever a less is more need, it's for the managers in your organisation, particularly they're the keys to unlocking potential with targeted learning and performance solutions. And as much as I really don't like buzzwords, but micro-learning as a buzzword, I can't actually argue that people have limited time to learn nowadays. So the trend is for shorter bursts of learning content. Less is more is the way to go, just like what Donald was talking about earlier. And in all honesty, that sort of shorter bursts of content isn't really something new. We worked with Hyundai back in 2010, 2011 for a sales rep training on the new i20 car. And they were all short, sort of 10-minute courses to get them quickly up to speed. They were standing on the forecourt, selling cars, not i20s, they weren't out at that point, but they were about to, selling cars and then training them up really quickly at that point of need. And because time is precious, and sort of 13 years on from then, time is still a barrier, to be honest. And a number of organisations are cutting staff numbers and teams. The economic landscape is changing, really huge amounts of change happening. So less time, I would say we're starting to see the trend that outsourcing is coming back to access the learn tech experts. And one specific expertise, which is down at number 8, is kind of the VR, the immersive learning side of things. There's some fantastic research and development happening in VR at the moment. VR helps minimise the gap between theory and practical application. And according to PwC, it's estimated that 23 million jobs will use VR and AR in some way by 2030. That is just an unconceivable, and it really not that far away. So with big corporations getting in the mix, it really is time to start looking at applications of this trend. And we ourselves recognised fairly early on that hybrid working is a driver for more assessment of people's capabilities at a distance. Without the office environment, we're kind of unable to observationally assess as we once did. So VR is an enabler to train and assess employees or learners, no matter where they are located. So indeed, we've already helped clients across a range of sectors implement VR as part of their learning and assessment journey. And going back to the data trend, XAPI, you can report it, also be used with VR, given access to all the data you need. So if you're looking for complex learning application, when that's really required, that's going to be that digital core for a business and create that employer of choice halo for your talent, you need a good learning tech partner to work with you to get that right. And that is where we have, for our clients, come in with the skills and experience to work alongside organisations. They tend to be got the complexities of multiple locations or connectivity or infrastructure challenges, or maybe they need flexible offline or online access. And then, but whilst meeting quite business requirements, integrated systems, single sign-on, regulations for systems and e-learning, from accessibility to security. There is a lot to consider, but we bring all the answers to the table. So to leave you with 3 things, I would have said, remember less is more when it comes to training or learning. Save time by utilising the people who have the expertise and get it right first time, and look to be that employer of choice. Okay, so now it's over to the audience more than anything. Right, so actually I'm going to go and have a look in the QA thing because it's on a different screen. But while there was one question that came in from John, and that was for Donald, and it was also sat well with me as well, John. So I was chatting with ChatGPT last night as I was looking for help with my son's Nat 5 maths homework. I maybe should ask you, Donald, but we were working out area, and ChatGPT came up with the right equation, but not the right answer, like the actual calculation. And as John was asking, how long do you think it'll be before we can trust the output of a GTP system? So, because how are we verifying the information or the data set that ChatGPT is using? And do you envisage any problems?
Yeah, well, the first thing about ChatGPT to remember is this is like an embryo, not even a born child yet. And to expect, and it's not a single source of truth. Nothing's a single source of truth, because there are some things that are contentious. Now, people are picking on the maths thing, and of course, it has been trained on language, namely words, not mathematics. Yeah. Now, actually, you'd have been better just going to a $1 calculator, to be honest, to get the answer you wanted there. But this is coming so. Let me give you an example. The Singapore maths exam, ChatGPT did a sort of borderline almost pass. Within a week, it had passed that maths exam, and it's one of the toughest on the planet for kids going into secondary school in Singapore. So what you will see is ChatGPT, you'll see this with the next round, it will be, as you said, Wendy, integrated with other systems. It will be an ensemble of systems. It will include a maths solver. So I used to teach maths. You'll get that automatically. You can go all sorts of things on the web that will do that. Like Photomaths is an app on your phone. You just point it at the maths problem. Most 13-year-olds have done this, of course, and it will give you the right answer. So what you'll do is integrate a solver into ChatGPT. If we have these ridiculous expectations that it's truthful and right on everything on day one, then we're missing the point. It's a bit like saying, "Oh, smartphones will never work because remember that day when they were the size of a brick? So they're never going to work." The expectations are through the roof. It's not a single a place of truth, but it will be better than anything we've ever seen before. If we want to know something, we generally go to Google, we go to Wikipedia. I remember the days when Wikipedia was banned from colleges and schools. And now, academics use it. I mean, literally people use Wikipedia as the first port of call because it's got very good indeed. But that took some time to develop. Mm-hmm. I think ChatGPT, in terms of its accuracy and the identifying the source from which the knowledge has come, that will come very, very quickly. So it's really just everything's in beta, but this is the first version. So, what it does is amazing, really. To expect it to cover everything and answer everything immediately will take time. So I think it's a matter of expectation management.
Yeah, I was struggling. I did use the $1 calculator as well, which told me that the answer was wrong. But yeah, it's a long time since I did Nat 5 maths. So there's a question came in from, because we were talking about it, all this data that's out there. So a question coming from Caroline Crawford to say, from a business organization standpoint, what are your thoughts around AI and organizational intellectual property? Okay.
Well, the first thing from a business, but remember, this is nothing to do with the AI thing will have massive impact on business. First of all, forget L&D for a minute. But actually, it will increasingly be used. So AI can be used in a general sense. So we have a free application, ChatGPT. We can just jump on it and use it. But of course, you can also use these tools. Indeed, I've been doing this for several years now. You can actually use the thing internally to do semantic search on your own content. Okay, so that means it's in a completely controlled environment behind your firewall for your own employees. I think that's already happening. So you'll see search increasingly useful. And of course, that matters on performance support, because you can deliver what you need within your pharmaceutical company, let's say, to your rep who's selling at that moment of need. On intellectual property, I think there's a lot of myths around this, that ChatGPT is breaking all the intellectual property rules, but it's not really. It's not like rap music that samples, it's sampling nothing. It's not like that. What it's doing is taking that huge corpus of text, which it's scraped from the internet, and turning it into sort of numbers. And then it's not even using the words, it's using the weightings between the words, like puppy and dog. and doing some very clever math, so nothing really remains of the thing in the past. So it's generating freshly minted stuff, and it often comes up in the arts, but that the history of popular music is the history of sampling from people before you, and that's the way this stuff goes. And I don't think it's much of an IP issue because it's freshly minted content.
So that kind of leads nicely on to a question that Peter Brown's posted. So I'll paraphrase a little bit, but he was looking to, because they're in the industry like pharmaceuticals, if they were wanting to embrace the data for the selective industry, do they have to pay for the tech to integrate into their own landscape? Is that how the big AI boys make their money? That's what he asks.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, the costs of building these models, but more importantly, the compute cost and delivery is eye-watering. And the very fact that it's been free for so long has amazed me, and it still remains free. And a lot of this will be the freemium model. Like Duolingo's free, Khan Academy's free, MOOCs are free, Google's free, So I think if you're in a pharma company, you go, hey guys, come on, you're not going to pay for this, given the fact that all the R&D was done externally to you. But I think, so I've had a look. ChatGPT, for example, if you were using the API, so typically a pharma company would use these services internally, and you get a key to an API into your systems. And the costs are tiny. So there's a cost per token per call. And they are I think it's something like 0.00002 cents per call. So I think you're looking at actually relatively, a freemium model, either free for everybody out there, which is great, let's say in education or learners, but relatively low cost. AI on tap at low cost, I think, is the solution. But I certainly wouldn't be hiring loads of machine learning people in my organization and trying to build these systems, because you need a couple of billion. I mean, OpenAI, who produced ChatGPT, got $1 billion in day one from Elon Musk, another $1 billion from Microsoft, and are in the process of raising literally around 10 billion further from Microsoft. So this is not a small investment game. And I don't think there are very few companies internationally who will be able to do this successfully on their own. They will be using these tools. Nobody builds their own Google, and the same would be true of AI.
Be interesting to see once, the APIs are, there's a lot of companies, the learning systems that are looking to connect to create that learner support piece with ChatGPT and the likes.
Yeah.
But you've got these APIs, and then there's the security of all those, and you're starting to, a lot of organizations can get a little bit concerned about the security aspect when it comes to the IT side of things. But we'll see how that moves forward. Yeah. As it goes. And talking of that, there was a question. Okay, more of a generalist one but still on ChatGPT from Vicky Howden. What's the best way to move the way educators think about AI so they embrace it and don't look at it as a threat, especially to create a true self-directed learner, not a capped individual who can only interpret learning given to them? I'm thinking about all aspects of education and educators here. Yeah,
now this is going to be tough. This is a really good question, because people are, I think, trapped in an old sort of banking model. I've got all the money in the bank and I'll lend you some and I'll get it. Open your mouth, I'll pour the knowledge in. And that's the pedagogy which we see in higher education, is the lecture and essay. That's been blown to pieces by this a little bit, not by the cheating in essays, but by the fundamentally really weird thing that's still the lecture. But I think in general, this is a good question because it actually had its answer in the question. Over the history of learning technology, so this is really the main lesson in this book, technology has gradually shifted the power from the teacher to the learner. So I can remember doing postgraduate research before Google. It was a nightmare. I was walking up and down library shelves trying to find journals. Everything is in my fingertips now. I don't have to go anywhere to learn. I certainly don't have to go to a university or a library, because everything is online. And I think now that we have AI, will switch into this co-creative, almost as if you're speaking to the system. This is the difference in pedagogy. It gives far more power to the learner to be that autonomous, competence, and social being on the web. And even in the 3D world, where now you made a very interesting point, Wendy, about it coming into the sort of metaverse and VR and AR world. AI will give that a massive boost because you can generate 3D worlds using AI. And in fact, that's already done in the games industry. I used to work in the games industry. It's been there for decades. AI-driven characters in 3D. You know, the world is 3D. We are 3D beings. Everything is flat and 2D and learning. PowerPoints, text. So I think really, how do you learn about this? Well, you know, just get online and try this stuff. I think the first thing is try ChatGPT, play around with it. If you want, you buy my book on AI for Learning. I've written, 300 pages on the subject. Go along and, speak to people and communicate on social media, especially. I found Twitter incredibly useful over this since November, since the AI stuff's been released, because it's allowed a flowering of innovation. Loads of people are using it in loads of different ways in learning. So try and follow those people who have been retweeting lots of that stuff. Oh, look, this person in this institution has been using it this way to generate an assessment or a rubric for assessment. This person has actually been using it with students just to ask questions as they go through the course. So it's all there, but you have to want to know about it and almost overcome your suspicions or negativity around it. Be positive before you start chopping it off at the knees.
So that leads nicely on to, I think there was 2 questions, roughly the same thing, but was asking about best practices for writing prompts, and that originally came from Gavin Drake. And he feels like that's a key skill for us to master quickly.
Yes. Yeah. Now I've just finished. I've been doing workshops in this, so I've got 100 sort of prompts and tips on prompting. It's not just this is the prompt you should use. Without going into that in a huge amount of detail, and I'm more than happy to share this with people, the main thing about prompting is start using it, and it's the very opposite of Google. Hardly anybody knows how to use Google well. They just type in a sentence. Actually, there's about 7 or 8 things that massively improves your efficacy in Google, which hardly anybody knows about. But it's even more true of prompting. And there are a couple of big things. One, remember it's Chat GPT. You have to keep going. It's an iterative dialogue, not a type in a thing and expect a block of text. That's not what this tool does. It actually knows what you've said, keeps a track on what you've said. So try one question. If you don't get what you want, add other parameters. It's an iterative, ongoing dialogue with knowledge. This is what I meant about this shift in perspective away from Wikipedia. Ask it a question. Oh, look, it didn't add 2 numbers together. That's rubbish, isn't it? What we have to get around is, no, keep going. Ask, what precisely did you want? Remember, this is just a piece of software. It's not a human being. So it's trying to read your intent, make your intent as clear as possible, add parameters. I want this number of words. I want it to answer this question, and be very precise with what you want. The more clues you give, the better the answer. And then there's loads of prompts. Different things. If you're creating content, I think a nice one is if you've got a graphic artist and they're creating graphic images, get the graphic artist to prompt, because they know to ask for a certain style or font, for example, that you might not know. So they'll be more knowledgeable on the parameters. But if you're a learning professional, then ask learning professional type questions. What type of learning is it? So it's complicated, but you have to work at it and learn it as a skill. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you showed me AI generated artwork last week, which was phenomenal. And I mean, you would have had to have, and there was it looked fantastic. And I think somebody in the audience, because it was within a college setting, had said that it was against sort of the creative process. But then I thought there must have been a huge amount of creative process behind it to have prompted it to have created that image. We're still really learning just what.
I think that against the creative process. This idea of human exceptionalist, I thought we'd go over that with Copernicus and Darwin. You know, we're just another animal doing our best in the world. The idea that we're absolutely unique in the universe, that works of art or some sort of godly, that's all religious imperative, really. But I think, you know, when you go to the cinema, you will not know what has been CGI created these days. You have no idea. It's seamlessly blended into the creative process. And have films got less creative because of that? No, they've got more creative, more genres. It's widened out. It's become more realistic, more stunning. So I think this idea that, you know, I have very little time for that. Oh, well, you know, human beings are the only things that produce truly creative stuff. Nah, not really. AI has already given us AlphaFold that will save hundreds of millions, if not billions of hours of research time in labs solving problems like cancer. I think that was a highly creative thing. But are we going to wait around for another 50 years while human beings do that in labs, or use AI on some pretense that we are unique in some way? I don't think so. I'm just back from Barcelona, you know. I was visiting the churches there, you know. The Baroque copied from people before them. Gaudi copied from the Gothic. You know, the whole artistic process has been one of adaptation and borrowing. And the same is true of text, images, and indeed video. It's a borrowing, and then it allows you to be more creative. You don't have to do all that sort of solid, boring bit. You can be creative on top of what it gives you as a gift.
So just to finish, I suppose is that what they're hinting at for ChatGPT 4? Is it?
Yeah.
Like what are you thinking? Well, we don't even know if it's going to be this week or next, but it's definitely coming. That's for sure. Yeah. But what do you think? What's in your expectations?
Well, my expectations is that whether it's ChatGPT 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, this is coming. So let's get out of that idea that this is going away somehow, or that it will just fritter away. This is the big bang. First of all, I say we've discussed this now. It's multimodal. In other words, it will not only be producing text, it will produce audio. So you'll be able to speak to it, and it will speak back to you, for example. On top of audio, it will produce graphics. And I gave the example in my talk you saw of, you know, an AI produced photograph winning a photography competition because the people couldn't tell the difference. And it was a magnificent image. And people would say it's a pretty beautiful and amazing and startling image. So why shouldn't it win in many ways? It will produce video. But of course, it already does. CGI, and every time you go to a movie, you're watching hours of the stuff if you watch Netflix. So you've already been living in an AI-created world in the movies. But it will produce all of those super quick. Now, this has big implications for learning, because on content creation, we'd be fools not to use that. Well, of course it's going to happen, because if you don't use it, if you don't have a strategy for this in L&D and AI, somebody else will have a strategy and impose it upon you, or you will lose out competitively. So I think resistance, in that sense, is futile. Another thing I would add on the large language models, it's not just large language models in AI. There's loads of other forms of AI that are equally as startling and amazing on adaptive learning, for example, or methods of assessment, which you guys at eCom are experts on. You know, I think we're looking forward to a future where you can assess anybody at any time online, because the AI is doing the adequate checks and so on. But I think also ChatGPT and other models the provenance, where does this knowledge come from, will be obvious. The accuracy will rise. People were astonished at how good it is. People are nitpicking around the edges because they're asking it weird questions. Like the famous New York Times journalist who asked it, you know, should I leave my wife, and was annoyed because it said yes. Well, really? I mean, you know, if my best friend came in a bar and said, do you think I should leave my wife? I think that's probably too late to give the answer. He probably should be by then, because, you know, it's obviously on his and probably her mind. So I think we're nitpicking around the periphery. This thing will get more accurate. Provenance will come in. It will get more efficient in terms of the energy it uses behind the scenes. Once trained, I think of fewer shots and so on. So all is good. All of these variables will get better very, very quickly indeed.
Yep. I'm looking forward to that as well. I have used it for other things rather than the maths, homework and language. And we use it within eCom as well. One thing I would say, and I hope that the investment and then the launch, you know, it can be very busy. So if you're a first time visiting, you know, there seems to be times where the servers are particularly busy because it's just growing so exponentially, and they're trying to keep up. Your numbers were startling. Just like, I don't think, I mean, there mustn't be anything that's been to the extent of that user numbers scaling up. Imagine as a business trying to scale up so quickly at that,
the people at OpenAI were shocked themselves at the success, not only how good the product was, that surprised even people within AI, but they were even more amazed at how quickly people took to it. And of course, they took to it because it blew their minds. And word of mouth, they had no advertising budget, and it spread around the world like a meme. It was really a wildfire type blaze, and that continues. That hasn't gone away unabated. And indeed, people are going, wow, if this is that good, and the next one will be truly amazing. But the surprises will be good surprises, because I think all the things we've just discussed, been very good questions, these are about its sudden improvement. What they're doing is, if for those technically who might be interested, they're actually using a thing called adversarial AI, which is a bit like taking AI and having two boxers in a ring, two sets of algorithms that fight each other, to make ChatGPT better. So when it does something odd, what they do is have another piece of AI that fights the odd one to make the system better. They're called GANs, generative adversarial networks. But they're using AI to create better AI. This is what's so astounding about this technology. You know, it can only really get better. It has sort of natural limits, but whenever there's a natural limit on one technique, another technique will come up. Like they're now talking about mortal computers using actual brain cells in a growth thing to mimic what the brain does. So Geoffrey Hinton, who's anybody in AI would know that name. He's one of the gods of the thing. He thinks that's another avenue we should be exploring. But we've crossed this Rubicon. This is, I think, bigger than writing, because it changes the way we work, the way we deal with the world, the way we deal with each other. It changes us as a species, and it changes learning. It changes what we learn, why we learn, and certainly how we learn, all for the better, because it makes it massively cheaper and easier and quicker to deliver.
Those are the best words: cheaper and easier to deliver.
Yeah.
Good place to finish on. So hopefully we've got through the questions and answer. If not, if there's anything that I've not managed to get through, we'll get back to you with them in due course. But that brings us to the end of the webinar. You'll receive an email in the next day or so with a link to the recording from today. We'll also be in touch with you to arrange a suitable time for your complimentary hour of consultancy if you so wish. And there's an accompanying white paper soon to be available, and we'll get that out to you as soon as possible. Also might be interesting with that MIT paper once that becomes available, and we could share the link to that. So on behalf of us all, thank you to Donald for another inspiring discussion, and thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.